What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Samuel Stevenson podcast. I'm excited to get this thing off the ground today. And to show that excitement, I'm going to bring up the person who I think can share some pretty interesting experiences. The whole point of starting this podcast was to share some human experiences and to learn about things that people might not even know exists. So he is a former United States Marine. He spends a large portion of time casually hanging thousands of feet from the ground. And most importantly, he is a Hexagon. Welcome, Mr. Will Stevenson, to the Samuel Stevenson podcast. Yes, you are my brother. How are you doing today, man?
Aloha, brother. I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear it. So, Will, how would you summarize what it is that you do?
I am paid to get high and hang out.
You're paid to get high and hang out. Can you please give a little bit more description on the getting high part?
So what I do is I ride on a steel cable about 15 to 1800 feet up in the air, and then I connect steel while hanging around in a harness.
That's
So
crazy. So you
I get
ride,
high
you
and I
get
hang
high.
out.
Okay. Okay. Why are you like riding steel cables? What does that mean?
Well, it's better than rope. It's better than spider web. It's better than, like string. Steel cables are just they're much safer than all of these things.
All right. All right. And why do you want to be safe?
Why do I want to be safe? Because
Yeah.
I'm 1800 feet up in the air.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So for someone who doesn't understand, these cables and height, like why are you this high? What is the thing you are on?
Okay, so what I do for a living, in all seriousness, is I build television and radio broadcast towers. It is a industry that is dying, obviously, in the light of cell phones and 5G and internet and all that stuff. However, there is still a large demand for TV across the nation, as well as radio, both FM and AM. So I build these towers, and they're basically anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000 foot tall gigantic skeletons whose entire purpose of existence is to hold a single TV broadcasting antenna or sometimes multiple broadcasting antennas. So that way, the folks in a 100-mile radius of said tower can get their delicious television.
Got it. So it's like the higher the antenna can go, the more people can get their delicious television.
That is correct. So a lot of places that have mountains, they won't build TV towers. They'll just have small, little tiny structures, and they'll throw an antenna up on top of them. But in like in the center of the Americas, and in like over on the East Coast and down in Florida and over here in Texas, there are a lot of TV broadcast towers. Now they're for the most part, they are built outside of major cities. So we hop around to all the major cities in the Midwest and on the East Coast and stuff like that. But yes,
Got it.
the
So
higher the higher the tower, the further the range.
okay, so if it was more cost effective for these people to hold this antenna up with like toothpicks or like helicopters, they would be that, and you wouldn't have a job. There would be no steel towers.
I mean, sure.
Okay, got it. So what what made you
Antenna needs to go high up in the air. It needs something to hold it. So we build a tower to hold it.
fair enough. Now how do these towers like how are they held up? How big are they?
Oh, they're not very so they're very tall, but they're incredibly narrow. I think that the widest tower that I've ever been on was about a 12-foot diameter.
Okay.
So it's a bunch of triangles stacked vertically, or excuse me, if you cut it in half sideways, if you take a little cross section, it looks like a triangle. There's 3 points, and each of those points is what we would call a tower leg. And then those tower legs all connect to each other via lattice work and bracing and such. And then it goes all the way up into the air. And they're generally mounted on like one single concrete block in the ground, and they're held in place by tensioning guy wires that spread out from the tower
So
into
like how
little anchor
many
points in the ground.
is this like so how many guy wires are normally on a tower like this? How many do you need to hold a tower up?
So it'll range anywhere between, so there's always 3 sets of guy wires. So you'll have like, you'll have a guy wire pointed in one direction. You'll have a guy wire offset in 120 degrees, and then you'll have a third guy wire offset in 120 degrees. So no matter how many wires you need, you will always have 3 wires spread out in equal directions to stop the tower from leaning left, right, forward, back, all that crap. The number of tiers of guy wires will depend very much on the type of tower and how tall it is. But generally speaking, if you're looking at about 1,000-foot tower, it's going to be at least six tiers of guy wires. So a total of 6 times 3 is 18. And I think that the highest tower that I went on was a 2,000-footer. And I want to say that it had 9 tiers and then an extra set of tiers up at the top for anti-torsion. So they have a whole lot. We'll put it that way.
Okay, so
like 18 to 35, somewhere in there, 36.
So when people normally think of a wire, or they like see a wire holding a telephone pole, is that like how big these wires are, or like what size wires are we talking about here?
Oh no, they're about like, so they'll range anywhere from 1 inch in diameter all the way up to 3 inches in diameter. And this is a steel cable, so steel cable 3 inches thick is very large.
That is large. How much does something like that weigh when you have to like pick it up?
Well, depending on how long it is, I think that 3-inch cable is probably somewhere around 5 to 10 pounds a foot. So if you have a 1,200-foot tall tower and you think of the guy wire as the diagonal portion of a triangle, you're looking at something around like 2,700 foot. So multiply that by, however heavy it is per foot, and you got a really heavy fucking wire.
So a lot of weight. That's
Yes.
crazy. How do you like pick things up, right? So you're building a tower. How are you lifting things up above this tower that's super tall?
So there's a combination of rigging and winches. So pulley systems and steel cable and a big giant drum that pulls said cable tight. So what'll happen is we will set a winch several hundred feet away from the tower base. We will run a cable from the winch all the way to the tower base. It will go through a block, and then it will go up the tower, go through another block at the top of the tower, and come all the way back down. And when you pull tight on that cable from the winch, it picks things up the tower, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Very good. Very cool. So what got you into this type of work?
So I just networked in. I've always been a fan of talking to people and having friends in all sorts of fun places. And after I got out of the Marine Corps, separated from active duty in 2019, a friend of mine invited me to come join his crew. And so I always thought it'd be a fun thing to do, to hang out up tall in towers and things. And, I thought I'd be changing light bulbs or something, but nope, we build them. So
Awesome,
I just
dude.
networked in.
Okay, so you got out in 2019 and it's now 2023. So 4 years? Have you been doing this for 4 years?
Towers for about 4 years.
Okay, cool. Would you say there were certain skills you learned as a Marine that make you better at this or capable of handling this?
Well, just discipline in general is one of the things that you pick up from active duty military service, So like, just being able to, there were no technical skills that I picked up in the Marine Corps, just character skills. And the character skills will serve you in any job that you find. So I would say that like discipline and the ability to take initiative and work through difficult scenarios, irrespective of how you might feel about it, was probably the most helpful thing.
Okay. Would you say that you run into particularly difficult scenarios that are generally more stressful than most people are going to deal with?
Well, yeah, absolutely. If everything that you're doing, right, so everything that we do at Heights is either structural or having to do with electrical work or anything, like a simple mistake could kill everybody on the crew, right? So paying attention to to details and, let's see, how does discipline relate? I suppose the best way to describe that, or no, that wasn't even a question. Your question was, is it dangerous? Yes, it's absolutely dangerous, because everything that we do can kill somebody, or well, not just kill somebody, kill everybody, and then also bring down, a $15 million TV tower.
So the ability to work under pressure that you may have probably experienced in the Marine Corps will kind of help prepare you for also working under pressure while doing this, you think?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Good deal. Did you have any moment of realization while you were doing this that you were like, I love this job. This is so great. I'm just going to keep doing this.
Yeah, I mean, my first time climbing the tower, I remember I was a ground pounder for about 3 months before I was ever allowed to climb up in the towers and stuff. And I just remember watching the crew come down every day, and they all had like their stories of everything that happened up in the air, and I'm just like sitting on the ground, dragging cables through the sand all day long, picking up 20-pound shackles and carrying them around and moving things from one spot to another, basically just being a little errand boy. And so I really grew in I really grew a desire to be like, oh shit, well, I'm missing out on all the cool stuff that's happening up in the air. And so the first day that we stacked a brand new tower, the boss said, hey, throw on your harness and start climbing up. And I was like, oh shit, this is awesome, because we had to rig the tower right after we had stacked it. So they needed somebody up in the tower for the first couple 100 feet. And so I just remember throwing my belt on and like climbing up the ladder as fast as I could and getting really tired really fast.
Oh,
Um,
that's
but
funny.
yeah, like day one, I knew I loved it. It was like, oh shit, this is something that like I've never been this tall and this high in the air before on a structure that's like
Yeah.
basically free,
Yeah.
Like I've got 5 foot of steel to my left and 5 foot of steel to my right, some ladders and some other shit, but like you're free up in the air, and it's exhilarating, and you could die. So there's that adrenaline rush as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved it since day one, man.
How long did you think, like, how long did it take you to get used to that? So it sounded like the first day of the job, right? Or not first day of the job, when you were told to get that harness on and you
Hmm.
were going to climb up, and that, like, that level of excitement, like, how far do you have to climb? Like, you were climbing a ladder, right?
Yeah, it's probably about 300 foot, something like that.
So 300 feet of ladder.
Hmm.
When you were first doing it, like, what safety equipment, first of all, do you guys use to, like, stay safe when you're doing this?
So we have a full body harness. It's got shoulder strap, dorsal strap, waist strap, leg straps, two safety shock absorbing lanyards that come out of your back, and then one working positioner that essentially sits off of your waist. It's like a further attachment of your waist that allows you to hook into the tower, and then you basically sit down in what equates to a seat. And that way you can basically sit down and work with both hands, as opposed to like trying to work while holding onto the tower.
Sure.
So that's what we have for safety equipment, and it's all rated for like 5,000 pounds and crap. So it's not like a human being's going to break it.
Okay.
But that's what we have for safety equipment. And so, what was your question? Just
Yeah,
safety
yeah.
equipment?
So so if you've got that safety equipment on, right, you throw it on for the first time, and this is the first time you've had to wear the harness?
No, I've worn it before. Like I'd put it on and like fucked around for shits and giggles on the ground.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like hooking to things that like I'm 3 foot off the ground, like nothing crazy, but like
Got
I'd
it.
worn it before.
Okay. So you throw on this harness and you need to climb this 300-foot ladder.
Hmm.
So, you know, when you're climbing, how do you climb a ladder while, like, staying attached to the ladder?
One step at a time. You take your arm, you go up on a rung, you grab onto it, and then you take your other arm and you go up to the next rung and you grab onto it. And you just keep repeating that process till you
Okay.
get as high as you need to go.
All right. So, like, if you were to slip and fall, like, how are you
Okay, so in
safe?
addition to in addition to actually holding on to the ladder, you take your two safety lanyards, right? And you clip the first one in up above your head, and then you climb until it's about chest height. Then you take your second safety hook and you reach up and you clip it in and you undo the one that you just clipped in. So that way you're clipped in at least one point at all times. And then you climb up to it, hook on, disconnect, climb up to it, hook on, disconnect, etc., all the way up the tower. It's
Got it.
very tiring.
Sure. And so I would imagine that, people always 100% of the time are always making sure they're attached to the tower so that nobody ever has any chance of dying, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a very important part of the job because like, shit happens. Sometimes you aren't paying attention and something falls and like hits your foot, knocks it off the tower, or like you step on a slippery place and you weren't like holding on to things incredibly well. And so like your back lanyard will save you in those scenarios. But yeah, we do 100% tie off at all times.
Excellent. Excellent. Did you have any moments of doubt when you started climbing, or like even on the ground, where you were like, "Oh man, I don't know if I want to do this." Like, as soon as you started to get up crazy up in the air and like dangerous things were happening, and you had those moments of pressure. Did you have any moments of doubt where you're like, I don't know if I want to do this"?
No, not really. I don't have time for doubt, man. Like you got to get shit done. Like if you spend all of your time wondering, oh, should I do this thing or should I not do that thing, you're gonna end up like just wasting a shit ton of time that you could be spending making decisions. So if you're sitting around having doubts, then you just shouldn't be in it to begin with.
Fair enough, man. I like that advice. That sounds
Mhm.
like a clip right there, man. So what is the highest? You said a 2,000 foot tower was the tallest
Correct.
tower. So that's like the highest you've ever been off the ground.
That's the highest that you're allowed to build towers at without like FAA waivers and crap. So that's as high as we go.
Okay. And is it like when you climb to the top of the tower, you said there was an antenna at the top of the tower.
Mhm.
So are you like what's the difference between climbing on the tower and climbing on the antenna?
So a lot of the antennas have so while a tower is an enclosed space, an antenna is just a stick, much like a tree with branches shooting off out of the sides. There's little climbing pegs a lot of the time, and the climbing pegs will have little rings that you can hook your safety stuff into, right? But climbing on an antenna, sometimes they don't have these safety rings, and so you have to basically take what equates to a rope, wrap it around, well, excuse me, wrap it around the entire antenna and then clip it back into yourself. So that way you're climbing the antenna with this like little rope shimmy that goes up as you go up. So that way if you slip and fall, like it will hopefully pinch onto the antenna. And if it doesn't pinch onto the antenna, then all that'll happen is you'll just slide down until it catches on that first climbing peg or something like that. And then you'll whack into the antenna and stuff. But it'll stop you from falling off the tower and dying for real. You might have like some broken bones or bruised ego or something, but nothing crazy. So climbing on an antenna is much like climbing on a tree that's had all the branches cut off about 1 foot out from the tree base. So that's what
Okay.
climbing on an antenna is like.
All right. And you're, 2,000 feet from the ground
Oh yeah,
in
there's that
addition to
too.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So you're a long way up. But I mean, anything past like 50 foot, you're just as dead, right? Like if you fall 100 foot, if you fall 200 foot, doesn't make a fucking difference. You're gonna splat on the ground and you're gonna have a bad time. I mean, well, maybe not. It'll be really quick, so no biggie. It'll be
So
everyone else's problem at that point.
yeah, yeah. Would you say the only difference then is how big of a splat puddle you make?
I wouldn't know. I've never seen anyone fall, and I'm hoping never to do that. But I
Sure.
I don't know. One could speculate that the higher you fall, the more potential energy you get.
That's
So
funny.
it
So
probably
how do
depends
you
on like on the shape you're making when you hit the ground too. If you're like this and you're all spread out, it'll probably it probably won't splat that much. But if you like curled up into a nice little cannonball, there's plenty of like pow.
plenty of
So
pow? That's
I guess so,
hilarious.
something like that.
So on the subject of things falling, how do you keep from dropping tools? And what happens when you do drop tools?
Well, the way you keep from dropping tools is you hold on to them. That's the most important thing to do. A lot of our
Okay.
tools have lanyards. There's some tools that we carry that it's unreasonable to lanyard everything you have. Like a tiny little screwdriver. It's not like you can't have lanyards on everything, otherwise you're gonna basically look like a tangled up spider web when you try and like grab any single tool that you have.
So for
What some
someone who
people
might not
do,
know, what is a lanyard?
oh, so a lanyard is just a piece of string that attaches from the tool to your body. So like, think of a keychain that you have that keeps your keys on like your belt or whatever the heck. It's just a string that stops something from falling.
Got it. Got it.
So some people call them drop cords, some people call them squids. Lanyards is the easiest one though because it symbolizes like, hey, this thing is stuck to me. Like you see those wannabe biker dudes that have the chain attached from their wallet onto their hip. That's a
Right.
lanyard for the wallet. So that way
Oh,
the wallet can't fall onto the ground and hurt somebody.
did
Wouldn't
you have
want
one of
the wouldn't
those?
want to get those wallet bruises. Did I have one of
Right.
those?
Did you have one of those in high school? Was that cool?
I'm gonna plead the fifth.
Oh man. Okay. So on a super tall tower, like a 2,000 footer, how
Hmm.
long does it take you to get to the top? Like how do you work on a 2,000 foot tower?
Well, if you're climbing, it takes probably about 4 or 5 hours. If you're riding a cable, it's somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes, something like that.
Okay.
And if you're
So
riding an elevator, maybe 15.
okay. So an elevator. So some towers have elevators in them.
Yes, some towers do have elevators inside. They're
Okay.
very nice because then you don't have to climb.
Right. So when there's no elevator and you need to work on the tower in
Hmm.
for like multiple days, right? Because the whole day is taken up just by climbing if you go up and down.
Correct.
So how do you you need to work on a job for let's say a month. what do you do to get to the point where you got a cable?
Okay, so it's a it's a not very complicated process of you take a rope and you tie the rope onto yourself, and then you climb all the way up the tower with this rope. And then when you get to the top, you put the rope inside a little block that's anchored up to the top of the tower somewhere, and then you climb all the way back down. But after a certain point, like you don't really have to climb. You can do what's called a controlled descent, which is where essentially the people at the ground, they have a friction device, and they help you descend so that way you're not carrying your entire body's weight while you're climbing down. So they put a little bit of friction on the rope, not enough to like take the weight of your body, but they put a little bit of the friction on the ropes that way, instead of, me climbing down as a 200-pound person with 45 pounds of tools on my belt, right? Instead of being 250 pounds, which with every single like handhold I find, I'm maybe like 100 pounds or 50 pounds, or however much math they can do to put an amount of friction on the rope to kind of slow my descent as I'm climbing down. So it makes it easier on the muscles and everything as you're going down.
Okay.
But you climb a rope all the way up, put it in a block, and then you climb it all the way down on the outside of the tower. And then a second person, because you'd probably climb up with somebody, they take the other end of the rope, which is still inside the tower, like it's going up in the ladder or whatever you use to climb up into the tower. They tie onto that end of the rope, and then they also climb down on the outside of the tower, exact same as you just did. So that way, both ends of the rope are on the outside of the tower, and then you use the rope and some sort of hoisting device to pick up the smallest cable, goes all the way up the tower, through that same block, then all the way back down the tower. Now you have steel cable instead of just a rope. So you can use steel cable to pick up much heavier things than the rope, and then you use that steel cable to pick other cables up the tower, and then voila, now you have the tower rigged. So there will be multiple blocks at the top of the tower, multiple pulley systems going up and down that will allow you to pick up things that are very heavy and all that sort of stuff.
Got it. So how do you like when you're stacking a tower? How do you, because you said you climb, you got this block at the top of the tower to pick things up. Well, if you have a block at the top of a tower, you can only pick up things to the height of the tower. So when you're stacking a new tower, how do you get new like chunks of tower on top of the other one? Like, how does that work?
So you have to do a completely different process using what's called a gin pole crane. A gin pole is essentially a stick that sits up at the top of the tower, that every time you stack a new piece of tower on, you make the stick go up one new piece of tower height, right? So let's say that this stick, for the sake of argument, this stick is 140 foot long. This is a 140 foot long gin pole, and my finger is the tower. The gin pole will sit like this on the tower. And what it will do, we're going to make the tower disappear for the sake of the argument, is we're going to then pick up another little tiny chunk of tower. It goes all the way up to the top of the gin pole, and then you swing it around the gin pole, and then you set it down on top of the tower that's already there. You bolt it in place all real nice and tight like, and then once it's fully secured, then you make the gin pole go up one more section, and you just repeat that process ad nauseum until you're done.
Got it. And I'm assuming the same is true to destack a tower.
That is correct. You just do it in the opposite order. So you take a piece of the tower off, swing it around the gin pole, lower it all the way down to the ground, and then you take the gin pole and you lower it down one tower section.
Got it. Have you ever had to or gotten to like take down a tower without the gin pole? Just like knock it over?
I have actually, as a matter of fact, down in Las Vegas, we had the opportunity to knock down some very small towers. They were only about 300 foot tall, about 1 foot wide. So very silly to climb up on, or not silly, but very like swingy. They swing back and forth real easy because it's super lightweight steel and super small tower. So like, a 200-pound person makes quite a difference. So yeah, we got to chop those bad boys down using like a chop saw. You just go out to one of the three anchors, you pull tight on it, you go to the other two anchors, or excuse me, you go to two anchors, you pull tight on them, and you go to one anchor and you loosen it up a bunch. And then after that, on the anchor that you loosened up, when it looks like the tower is leaning over just a little bit, right? Then you chop that loose anchor, and then the whole tower just like falls away from it, nice and straight, boom diddy yada. Then you just chop up the tower on the ground, call it a day.
Good deal. So
Yeah.
so what happens when you're up on a tower and like a storm rolls in, because you're super exposed, right? How do you deal with weather?
Well, there's a couple ways. The first way is you just try and pay attention to what the weather's going to be like for the day. So that would be something that either the foreman or whoever's on the crew, like the safety guy, they would like. Usually everybody knows what the weather's going to be because everyone has smartphones nowadays. So we just pay attention to the weather. And if we see what looks like stormy conditions, then we don't start jobs that will take, several hours to finish during the potential that a storm could pop up and ruin everything. Right? Uh plenty of jobs on a job site, or there's plenty of tasks, I should say, on a job site that don't take 5 hours while being up in the air to complete. There's small things that we can do. There's prep work. There's always something that isn't like the main meat and potatoes of the job. Generally speaking, if you're up in the air and you're trying to stack a tower or destack a tower, either build one or take one down, once you start a process, once you start removing part of the tower, you can't just stop halfway, because now you've got like a dangerous part of the tower like getting all dangly and everything. There was this one time, to give an example, there was this one time when we were down in Vegas where we had to spin the top about 100 foot of a tower. And in order to do that, we had to disconnect the tower completely from the tower, like from the rest of it. So the top chunk of the tower was just sitting there, being held in place by a little tiny sandwich clip, right? That held the weight of the whole thing from shaking around back and forth. We knew it was going to be a windy day. And so we had taken out all the bolts for the tower, and we thought that, okay, we could just spin this bad boy easy peasy lemon squeezy. What we thought would take about 15 minutes ended up taking us about 3 hours. And we were able to rotate the tower enough to get it where it needed to be to bolt it back in place and get off the tower before the crazy wind started picking up. But there's a lot of times where like you can avoid dangerous scenarios just by paying attention to what the environment's going to be like before you commit to a single course of action that has to be completed before you like abandon it. So if we would have left that, if we would have tried to escape the tower because the storm was coming, or something to that extent, right after we had started it, then it would have been a whole world of mess, because it could have brought the whole tower down. It could have killed us in the process. So like there's a lot of things where if you get the forward momentum going on a course of action, there's points of no return where you can't stop. So another example of that would be if you've stacked a tower up to the point where you need to put on the next set of guy wires. Once you reach a certain height, a tower is not steady like forever. It'll stay put if it's in good weather conditions, but the distance between, we'll say, guy level 5 and guy level 6, so the fifth tier of guy wires, right, at like we'll say 700 foot of tower, up to the sixth set of guy wires, which we'll say for the sake of argument is another 200 foot up in the air. Once you get 200 foot of tower sticking above the last set of guy wires, you've got 200 foot of steel that's just like rocking back and forth in the wind. Now it's not going to break, right? It'll like that your mind will break before the steel will, right? But it can bend and it can do permanent damage to the rest of the tower. So if you stack a tower past a certain height above the last set of guy wires, you basically have to get the next set of guy wires up, pinned into the tower, and pulled out to have at least a little bit of tension, so that way the tower will be less inclined to sway around and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's crazy. So how much time do you think elapses before you're like, all right, guys, we're going to do this next section? Like how many sections, how much time does that take between when you're committed to finishing to when you're like safe?
So if we start a good crew, so like when it was myself, Levi, and John up in the air with our operator and Mike on the ground, the three of us were able to, or well, I guess the five of us were able to stack 3 sections of tower and do a set of guy wires in one day. So you can get 3 tower sections on in about the morning time, roughly. You'll go a little bit late into lunch, and then you're able to go up and hook in the guy wires after that, and then pull them tight. And by that point, it's like the end of the day. So 3 sections in guy wires is pretty good for a day's work.
So that 3 sections, is that like at what point
30
do
foot.
you need the guy wires, right? So how many sections? So if you're stacking sections and you're like, okay, well now we're maybe 3 sections above the previous guy wires. At what height do you need more
Three is
where you're
the
committed?
three is the maximum, generally speaking. Now, I'm not an engineer. I'm not in charge of like the rigging plans or anything. I can only speak from experience here, but we've never gone higher than three sections out of wires overnight. So like if we're stacking, then we'll stop at three and we'll have temporary guy wires on it, right? Just some much smaller cables, but there's still something rather than nothing. We'll have temps on it, and then we'll stop there, and then the next day we'll stack another three above the temps, and then we'll plug guy wires into it and pull them tight. Then the next step would be to slack the temps in and drop them back down.
Okay, so normally like there's 6 sections or so between guy wires.
Something like that, yeah. This is like a general rule. Every tower's like a lot of towers are different, you know. Some will have eight, some will have four, some will have five. Everything is six is a good general rule of thumb. I suppose would be a good answer to your question.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like things can get a little bit crazy. What is the craziest story that you could tell from like oh my God, we're all gonna die, or it can be a positive story or whatever. Like, what's the craziest story you could tell from all of these jobs?
Ah, man.
Or if there's just been so many that are like death moments that just pick one.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. There was a storm that hit while we were in Florida, and so normally you ride up and down the tower on the load line. You ride up and down on a steel cable. Now we were using our steel cable to hold up a section of the tower called at the very top of this tower we were building was a T-bar section. So the T-bar is basically the tower goes up, and then at the very top, it's got a little set of arbors that go out like that stick out over the side. We had installed one, and we needed to install the other, so that way the tower wouldn't be like leaning all cattywampus, right? So we had installed one, and we had brought the other one all the way up, and we had rotated it around, and we were getting it in place for where it needed to be to like connect it completely to the tower. And we had got the first couple of bolts in, and a lot of these bolts require the usage of like pry bars and sleever bars and bullpins and things like that. So it's a long process of getting these bolts in. And then a freak storm popped up out of nowhere, and lightning started striking the tower. So right before the lightning started striking, we are like, hey, that looks like a storm, like 2 minutes out, and this is Florida. Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking or not.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Um, Shoot, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so lightning started striking the tower, and because the load line was still attached to the T-bar, and we hadn't got it fully secured onto the tower yet, we had it secured enough to where we could leave it there with the load line still holding the weight, and the handful of bolts that we had in it stopping it from like flipping and sliding back and forth and stuff. We essentially had to climb down this tower in the middle of a thunderstorm. So that was pretty cool. About 1,500 feet, getting soaking wet. You just like the rain's coming at you sideways. There was, I think our tower got struck by lightning 3 times during that process. So as long as you stay inside of the tower while you're climbing down, then the lightning will hit the tower first, and then the tower will be the pathway of least resistance into the ground, and you'll probably be fine. We were all fine in this instance, but
Man,
yeah, you don't
so
want to be on the outside of the tower because then you're a beacon in between the tower and the lightning. You got to be
yeah.
inside the tower, so the tower is its own beacon.
So is that why you guys climbed down instead of riding like the cable outside the tower or something?
Yeah, so we didn't have the option to ride the cable because the cable was attached to the device that we were installing. And so I
Oh,
was like,
that's right.
well, that's not an option. So climb down. And we climbed down in about 30 minutes. So it was a long climb. It
There,
was a
it was
very
a
long
long,
climb.
you climbed down in about 30 minutes.
Yeah, 1,500 foot in about 30 minutes. It was very fast.
Holy smokes.
Yes.
But I guess there was motivation.
There was motivation. Yes. So
Wow. So when y'all are what kind of other weird things, like other injuries or things weird like towers can do to you that like people don't know about? Like you
um
said earlier you were dealing with like electrical stuff, right? So
Yeah, so when we deal with lighting systems, all of these towers need to have lights on them. And so we're the ones doing the wiring because like electricians aren't going to go up in a tower. So everything that we do is a lot of like wiring stuff. And generally speaking, we don't do wiring when the power is on, right? But I'm sure there's some sort of exception to that rule. I've never done wiring while the power is on. It's always been the guy on the ground cuts the power, we do the wiring, we plug everything in, you know. But if you're showing up to a new tower and part of the troubleshooting requires that the power be on, then it's just one of those things that it's like you need to have a little bit of know-how on how the lighting system and the electricity can, make you have a bad day. But the biggest concern is falling, and then also watching out for, high tension cable. So like the cables don't break, like they never break because we don't like load them unnecessarily. However, like a lot of things can shift when you're picking up and pulling 20,000 pounds. Like there's not a lot of stuff in the world that weighs 20,000 pounds, right? So a tree, you can probably uproot a tree from the ground with 20,000 pounds of force. You can lots of things will shift around. So when you're picking up and moving things and pulling things, there's like there's pinch dangers, there's crush dangers,
Right.
there's slam dangers. So these are things you have to pay attention to while you're on the ground, in addition to like falling when you're up in the air.
So you were talking about at the very beginning, you said TV and radio towers. So like, what's the
Correct.
difference?
Well,
What?
TV, you can see it. Radio, you can't see it very well. You have
Oh
to
my
have on
God.
some special goggles in order to be able to see radio.
Okay. From some of my background, that's like these things are emitting like radio waves and things like that. Are you guys getting like cancer, or like how do you guys deal with the radiation and stuff like that?
Also, like if there's other, so if we're on a TV or radio tower where there's multiple antennas, oh, excuse me. If there's multiple antennas, then we require that the other stations that have antennas like fully powered up, that they power down their antennas as we are within their like apertures. So if we're working near if we're working near other TV antennas, then they got to turn off the power so that way they don't cook us, like a microwave would. It's the same basic principle. It heats up the water inside of your body, and
Gotcha.
then you have a bad time
So you get
over a
microwave.
long period of time. Yeah, you get microwaved.
Okay.
That's how it's been described to me. I've never been microwaved, so I don't know.
Sure, sure. So what about the difference between AM and FM radio? Is there anything like how
So
does that
AM
work?
radio requires that the entire tower is the antenna. And so it's isolated from the ground with ceramic isolators, and all the guy wires have little tiny ceramic balls on them every set distance of every set distance or every set interval. So that way the guy wires do not turn into beacon antenna combinations.
Okay.
So with FM radio, it's just an antenna aperture. With AM radio, you use the entire tower as a relay or as a beacon.
Okay, so have you ever had to work on a tower while like these, I mean, you said for the FM is on, people just have to like power it down while you're
Mm-hmm.
passing through this certain section. So how do you work on a tower, or can you work on a tower while the AM is on? What would happen if you did?
So you can't work on oh, you can't work on an AM tower while it's on. You have to turn it off. However, most AM towers work in a relay system where it is multiple towers and they're all on. So while the tower that you're on might not be turned on, most of the time the other ones are, because the station still needs to get their money by broadcasting their radio signal and everything. So they will have their other towers turned on, at which time like the tower that you're on is no longer a broadcasting tower, it is now a receiving tower. And so a lot of the electrical energy, because AM works in relays, it compounds or something along those lines. I'm not sure the exact science behind it, but an AM tower, it will take in the power from another AM tower, then the power from another AM tower, and then all those powers combined is what makes a signal. So if only your tower is turned off, there's still the whole other relay turned on, they're still broadcasting your antenna, and now instead of a broadcaster is a receiver. And so if like your little worker bee and you have to go and touch this other tower, if it's not grounded out very, very well, then you're going to get shocked and also burned at the same time. It's like a weird combination.
Have you ever been shocked?
I have indeed. I have some nifty scars from where I carelessly touched a thing that I was not supposed to touch when the engineers were like, "Hey, don't touch that." And I was like, "Oh, I'll be fine." And then I was not fine. It
So what is that experience like, getting shocked by an AM tower?
was very painful. It's like it's similar to being so it's not getting shocked in the electric sense. It's getting burned in the electrical sense. Because as soon as you discharge the tower with your human flesh, it burns you. There's like a flash of light, much like a weld, and then it burns you also like a weld. And then in addition to all that, you can hear for the split second that the burn's going on, you can hear whatever the signal is that they're playing over the radio. So like if you touch an AM tower and it's like, and you start getting burned, it's like, oh, this is brought to you by, Little Caesars Pizza or whatever, or like, welcome to WQRF, whatever. I don't know. So
That's
like
crazy.
you can hear the stuff as it's burning you. So it's just kind of a, don't try it, but it's a nice little silver lining.
So if you want free radio, you can basically just walk up to an AM antenna and touch it, and you'll
Uh,
get free radio.
I don't think that free is the right way to put it, because you can get free radio just by turning on your car, but that's another way to get uh, AM radio, and it comes the cost for that situation would be the fact that you have to put yourself in physical danger in order to get said free radio.
Right. So, okay. What I really wonder about is the sound quality in your brain as you're getting shocked. Is that like the best sound quality that you could possibly get? Because there's like no speakers, right? There's no
No, not at
interference.
all.
Is it bad?
No, it's terrible quality.
Oh.
And I'll tell you, it's because you don't pay attention to the sound because you're like, oh, my flesh is burning.
Oh, I
So
got
terrible
you.
quality.
Okay.
It would take one hell of a dedicated like audiophile or cinephile, whatever audiophile, whatever. It would take one hell of a dedicated person to get over the burns for the quality of the sound. And
Sure.
I don't think it would even sound that good because, like, I don't think my hand is built to be a speaker system. I think it's built to be a hand. I think a speaker system is built really well to vibrate and make speaker noises. My hand probably doesn't do a very good job, and I don't think my elbow would, or my fuzzy slippers, or nothing.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, man. So would you recommend this work to a young man? Like, is this a job that can pay the bills? Like, how does this, is it lucrative?
I would recommend it to everybody that's not a bitch. If you're a bitch, don't get into it because you're just going to waste everyone else's time, But if you're like if you're an ambitious young person and you're not afraid of being in the elements, you're not afraid of sweating a bit or picking up steel or being in a dangerous place where your actions could kill you or other people, then yeah, go for it. Like if you're a person of high like moral character, you want to make a lot of money, like get into this line of work. It's great. The trades jobs are like looking past just tower work in general, any sort of blue collar work, any sort of trades job, like right now is the time to get into it if you're a young man. Just because there is such a high demand for it, there's so many boomers and Gen Xers retiring right now that like any sort of trade job, any sort of physical labor job, like you you will blow the competition out of the water if you're a young ambitious man who knows how to listen to positive direction and take a bit of risk here and there.
Fair enough. So it would be a good job for an ambitious young man in terms of
Yes, it would.
getting a monetary reward at the very least.
Yes, it would. And I would really only recommend it to single men or like dudes that aren't worried about like family life. If you want to be locked down to one geographic location, then broadcast tower work is probably not the thing for you. You might be better off going and being a fiber ferry and building cell towers or those little cell tower guys. We love
So,
you, cell tower guys.
uh-huh. So that's a good point. So for like logistics, how do you handle the logistics of this job? Like, are you living in one place? Like, how does that work?
So for the line of work, because we are constantly moving around the states, we get paid mileage, we get paid per diem, and also like time, like drive time. So when you're on a job anywhere from, six to like from anywhere from like a weekend to 6 months, like you're getting paid per diem to live there. So per diems is to cover the cost of hotel, food, and like just daily living expenses and whatnot. So your per diem is for that, and then your hourly pay is, just like your standard hourly pay for any other job. Um, so what I do is I will switch around from living right here in this fantastic shipping container that I'm in right now. Like some of our bigger jobs require that we have access to all of our tools that we keep in our shipping containers. And so our boss will move them from job site to job site. So I will just like sleep in this well air conditioned little room, and I got a little cooker here. I got a refrigerator right over there. So I have like decent enough things for surviving and getting by, right? So I will live in shipping containers, I'll live in hotels, I'll live in Airbnbs. Sometimes I'll sleep out of my truck. It just depends on what like the time horizon is, how much resources we have at each job site, my budgeting constraints and things of that nature. But those are the main ways that we go about surviving on different job sites is either camping out on the site or um, uh, or getting like hotels and Airbnbs and stuff and
Got
splitting them
it.
amongst
So
ourselves.
so you guys are always like moving around
Correct. We
all
are
around the U.S.
pretty much always moving around. Yeah. So not for the people that like to tie down roots in one place.
Okay. So I presume it'd be then difficult to own a house or have anything that ties you down.
I mean, I own a house. I don't know how wise it is. I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. But I suppose if you don't have someone watching the house for you, or if you don't like trust the neighborhood for it to get broken into, like that's just a risk that some people might be willing to take or might not be willing to take. But it's something that people need to consider is like if we're always on the road and we're always out and about, then you're going to be spending very little time at your house. So like if you get a water leak or a pipe bursts or a fucking airplane crashes into your house or something, like a lot of the time you're not going to be there to deal with it like right away. So it's just something to consider.
Got it. Got it. So I see that you have a gun behind you there. So you spent time
No,
in
I
the
don't.
Marine. How long do you have did do how long were you in the Marines?
I was active duty Marines for 8 years and 1 month. So from 2011 all the way up to 2019.
Okay. And what were you doing?
So I did a whole bunch of things in the Marine Corps. My main designated occupation specialty was logistics. So I worked at major points of embark and debark. So that would be things like an airport. So we call them different things in the Marine Corps, but essentially an airport, right? An airport, a beachhead, uh, um, a regular like shipyard port, a railway, things of that nature. Wherever there is a lot of people and gear coming and going onto and off of major like vessels of embark and debark. That's the bread and butter of what my job was supposed to be. I didn't spend a whole lot of time doing it because I was in a non-deployable unit for the first half of my career, and the Marines in that unit were essentially loaned out to deploying units, and we rotated through that way. We had way more Marines than they had deploying units, and so the chance for Devil Dogs to get put out on a deployment or something were fairly slim. So I spent a lot of time essentially occupying space in a military manner. Did a lot of sweeping, picked up a lot of cigarette butts. Um, but that was the first half of my career. At some point in that first half, they sent me off to what's called coach's course, which is every Marine has to be a rifleman. So that's part of our ethos is that every Marine is a rifleman, and as such, every Marine has to requalify every single year using their service weapon, whether it's an M16, an M4, a pistol, or like whatever the case may be, depending on your rank or your job, right? So they sent me off to coach's course so that way I could help train the Marines in my unit how to shoot better and how I could, and like the point of the course is to assist other Marines in honing their marksmanship skills and just becoming better marksmen. So I spent since I wasn't doing my regular job in the Marine Corps because there wasn't much need for it at the time, I spent a lot of time coaching Marines up on how to shoot rifle and pistol. And that ended up being like the meat and potatoes of my career. I ended up deploying twice for my main job as a logistician, but those are just like little 6-month pumps. The meat and potatoes that I spent the majority of my career doing was marksmanship instruction. So for both rifle and pistol.
So you know how to shoot
I'm familiar with the concept.
just a little bit. You've only trained
Just a
thousands of
little,
people.
just a little bit. Yeah, I think for the last 2 years in the Marine Corps, so in my unit, I trained maybe like 50 to 100 people, something like that altogether. Over my last 2 years in the Marine Corps, I got sent out to operate the Stone Bay ranges that are meant for all the Camp Lejeune Marines over on the East Coast. And during my 2 years there, I think I saw roughly 20 to 25,000 Marines on my range qualifying. So it's kind of like a neat little warm fuzzy feeling to think about that I assisted in the Marine Corps readiness for about 25,000 trained killers.
Yeah. That's like 25,000 more people that are more likely to survive now because
Correct.
they
And
know how to use a weapon.
not only them as individuals, but the people that are around them, right? So the whole idea with marksmanship is the Marine Corps is like you learn marksmanship and you learn this, like how to be a rifleman, not just for your own sake, not just like to protect yourself, but also to protect the people around you. So you got to think for every like one person that knows how to shoot, if they're around like 10 people, then that means that 10 people are now safe, and if all 10 of them know how to shoot, then there's 100 people around them that are safe, and so it multiplies outward. So the more people that you have that know a skill that has a very realizable effect, the better off everyone around them is going to be. So the Marine Corps ethos of every Marine as a rifleman assists in any sort of mission that the Marines do where there might just be like surprise enemy contact, something like that. Like
That makes total
there's a whole
sense.
slew of reasons, but that's what I boil it down to in my own like personal understanding of like what is the reason that we do all this, right?
Sure.
To
So would you
survive and get
say,
goals accomplished.
yeah, would you say that, it'd be a good skill for most men to have is to know how to shoot, to know how to aim, know how to use their weapons if they have got them?
I think that the easy answer to your question is yes. The more complicated and nuanced answer is that everybody should learn all of the things that empowers them to make their own decisions and to enforce their own will, sovereignty, power, authority, responsibility, all those fancy words. If you're not undertaking a skill that could help you, stay alive or protect the people that you love, then like, you can't be upset if somebody else comes around and beats you. The world
Sure.
is a constantly cold and cruel place. There's lots of bad things that happen because even though the world's full of good people, there's also people who they think that they're good, but their goals don't necessarily align with yours, and they might want to inflict their goals on you. So
Got
if
it.
you don't want other people to force their will on you, then you had better have a means to resist such a thing. And a little piece of metal moving at 1,500 feet per second does a pretty good job of that.
Got it. Got it. Seems like a very good skill. So how many guns did you say you have at this point?
I plead the fifth.
Oh, that's right. Fair enough. So, man,
Enough.
so if somebody wanted to like learn
I don't have any
and
guns. I lost them all in a boating accident. It was very tragic. What you see behind, that's just a piece of wood.
that's a piece of wood.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
That's right. So, if somebody wanted to learn, and said like, well, this guy looks like he knows what he's talking about, how would they get a hold of you?
Oh man, so I don't know if you're gonna have the description for any of my socials down here in the video description. Is
I'll
this
put you in
going
the
on
description.
YouTube, Spotify? What's this going on?
It'll go on at least YouTube and a few others, but I'll put your handle in like your Instagram handle if you want.
Okay, yeah. My Instagram is will.stevenson.iii, like Will Stevenson the third. My Telegram handle is t.me Will Stevenson, W capitalized, S capitalized. My Twitter is Jagdpanzeralfie100. Don't worry about finding that. We'll put a link in the description. Same thing with Facebook. It's Will Stevenson 3. So we'll have all that stuff for the folks. If you want to reach out to me, Instagram, Telegram, those are my two primary mechanisms of communication. If you want to hit me up on Twitter or Facebook, I'll be a little bit slower to respond, but those are semi-effective ways to reach out to me. Telegram's probably the best because I know Instagram will filter out people who I'm not friends with, and so I'll have to dig a little bit deeper. Your best bet's probably Telegram. So hit me up on Telegram if you wish to hone your marksmanship skills. And I can provide coaching and counseling over the internet. It won't be as effective as if you hire me to show up in person. I don't have any sort of payment program or mechanism for doing that yet, but money talks. So if you name a large enough price, I'll come find you and I'll teach you all sorts of great things. But yeah, just reach out to me on Telegram. If you just send me video of you shooting, I can look at common patterns and I can address common problems. If you're already a decent shooter, then moving past like basic troubleshooting stuff will take a little bit more time and things of that nature. But yeah, I'm very capable and I'm super duper confident and competent when it comes to shooting.
Excellent. Good deal. Well, I appreciate you joining me today. Hopefully we have some people who've learned some things from this, and yeah, man, had a good talk. So appreciate it.
All right.